Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be a part of the MI conference in Sweden. My name's Stan Steindl, and I'd like to talk with you today a little bit about cultivating compassion as part of the MI spirit through compassionate mind training. I'd like to thank Ola for inviting me to be a part of the program today, and also to Malin, who made the recommendation. Last year, I was fortunate enough to be in Tallinn in Estonia and presented a full day workshop on the topic of cultivating compassion as part of the MI spirit. And I think this is Malin here in the audience. So, who am I? I'm a clinical psychologist in private practice at Psychology Consultants in Brisbane, Australia. And I've been working in private practice since 1999. I'm also an adjunct associate professor at the University of Queensland School of Psychology, co-director of the Compassionate Mind Research Group, and also convener of our UQ Compassion Symposium. And I've been a member of MINT since Chicago 2007. And so let's move into the presentation. First of all, I'll just talk a little bit about what I have planned for us for the session today. I thought we might look first of all at what is compassion, because actually that's quite an interesting question in and of itself. Is what is compassion? There's a range of different kind of perspectives on that. We might even, I'll ask you to have a bit of a think about what you feel compassion is, and then we'll move into Paul Gilbert's model. So he's the person who developed compassion-focused therapy and compassionate mind training. We'll have a little look at his definition of compassion and so on, and then start to explore what this compassionate mind training is, how it might be applicable to us as practitioners and as MI practitioners, move towards exploring some of the attributes of a compassionate person and some of the competencies to develop all of that. And my plan is at the end to have enough time to actually do a little practice, a little imagery type exercise that might be something that you can explore and take away in terms of cultivating compassion for yourself as part of the MI spirit, but perhaps even just as part of your life. In fact, along the way, there will be little opportunities to speak with each other, and perhaps even some little exercises and so on as we make our way through. So let's actually start by exploring what is compassion. And I thought the best place to start would be to see what Miller and Rolnick have to say in their third edition of Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change. This is really the book where they first introduced compassion, more officially at least, into the MI spirit. But they didn't say very much about it, actually. You know, I sort of scanned through, especially some of those early chapters and so on. And really, these are the main things that they actually say about compassion. And for them, to be compassionate is to actively promote the other's welfare, to give priority to the other's needs. Compassion is a deliberate commitment to pursue the welfare and best interests of the other. And to work with a spirit of compassion is to have your heart in the right place, so that the trust that you engender will be deserved. And so, prioritizing the other's needs, their best interests, and having your heart in the right place. But as I say, that was about all that they said in the third edition. And so it really kind of beg the question, you know, what is compassion actually, and how do we cultivate that as part of the MI spirit, and where might we be able to find some other information and theory and so on compassion. And of course we know some of the faces of compassion, the sorts of more famous versions of compassion and a compassionate life and compassionate action. Some of the more recent examples as well of perhaps even fierce compassion and the notion of righteous anger as a part of compassion. But this is where I was going to ask you guys to have a little bit of a think for yourselves, defining compassion. So just for a few minutes, not for a lot of time, but just turning to the person next to you and see if you can answer this question. What is compassion? What are the words that come to mind, or the characteristics of compassion or a compassionate person? And if you're on Zoom somewhere by yourself, what I wondered was whether you might be able to type some thoughts into the chat function on Zoom, if that was all right. So if you wouldn't mind now just turning to the person next to you, or thinking a little bit to yourself, and having a chat about what is compassion. Off you go, guys, for just a few minutes, please.
Jag kan vara med lite.
Ja, genuint intresserad av den här människan.
Ja, det kan vara lite indirekt, va?
Ja,
Jag tänker grej.
inte mot någon annan, kanske.
Nej, men jag tänker hon har det här problemet. Och hur mycket kan man? Men då tänker jag att det är hela mänskligheten.
Ja, på ett sätt är det det.
Ja, det kanske inte är en till er. Det vet inte jag.
Den frågan om det är mänsklighet.
Nej, det vet man inte. Men Martin Luther King är också. Man brinner för någonting här inne. Något eller någon.
Ja, men det finns en känsla med som hos en själv. Så, alltså känsla av att vara berörd på något sätt.
Att göra något bättre.
Ja.
För någon. Eller något.
Ja, men man är berörd av det.
Ja.
Ja, men precis.
Man brinner.
Ja, men då blir känslomässigt engagerad i sig själv.
Ja. Och då kan
Just
det
2 minutes to go. Just 2 minutes to go.
Även om det är något så lever vi ju här.
Men det är lite känslan finns med.
Känslan, det är verkligen något som är viktigt för en.
Det svåra är ju då om man har ett samtal med någon. Att framkalla den känslan hos sig själv. Om det är kanske till och med en person man har svårt för. Man känner en viss aversion mot på något sätt. Så.
Det är en fejkad compassion.
Ja, men känslan ska ju vara i riktning mot alltså en hjälpande. Alltså jag kan ha en känsla av att jag kan känna hat. Alltså jag kan tycka illa om personen. Det är inte och då kan man
resurseffektiv då. Eller
det här är en lista.
Men det är den här man brinner för.
Ja, men det är som att det brinner för när du är känslomässigt engagerad och det är för någon eller något.
Ja. Och man kan... Vad sa du?
All right. Well, we might actually bring that one to a close. Sorry, I could hear some wonderful conversations going on. Of course, I had no idea of what you were saying, which was kind of fun, but also made me suddenly think, what is the word for compassion in your language? Can anyone sort of tell me what the translation would be?
Vad är det? Medkänsla?
Medkänsla.
Med...
How do you spell that? Oh, there it is. Okay. Oh, wow.
Skriv alla.
I can't. I'll just go like this, and I'm just going to put it here, maybe. Aha.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, all right. So, what are some of your thoughts in terms of what is compassion? What came up for you in some of those conversations? There's been a few things mentioned in chat. Matt's said, compassion is when I see the suffering that my patient is experiencing and I show through action that I want to help them feel better, to alleviate their suffering, and I do it for them, not for myself or for the benefit of my healthcare unit or anybody else. I do it for them. So it is sort of seeing suffering and taking action. Any other thoughts?
Ser ni? Ja. Människokön. Jag tror inte, jag får säga högre.
Loving kindness.
I heard you. Loving kindness. I think I heard you. Is that what you said? Yeah. Loving kindness. Yep. And then Maria has said, yeah, empathy. Empathy is a big part of compassion, being able to sort of, well, both affective, I guess, in terms of being able to resonate with the feelings of another, and cognitive, being able to take, the other's perspective. Any other thoughts about what is compassion?
Vad står det med?
By the end of today, we will have an idea of where we might be going with compassion.
Jag tycker inte det är ett bekvämt ord på svenska. Nej. Compassion låter bättre.
Men jag tänker i mindfulness så använder man ordet compassion. Där hittar man inte ett ord som på svenska som passar.
We are discussing the translation for medkänsla, and we don't think that quite describes what compassion is.
Okay.
For us.
Okay. So maybe what
compassion is a physical feeling too.
Oops. A physical feeling.
Did you get that?
Det kom någonting om att han bytte högtalare. Eller det var någonting som systemet gjorde.
Alltså hos oss?
Ja. Kom upp till
Nu kommer det.
Well, this is okay. This is really great. So, yes, it's kind of seeing suffering. It's taking action. It comes from a place of loving kindness or a kind of a caring motivation. It's a bit about empathy, being able to understand the other person and their feelings. You can't hear me now? Can you hear me? Mats can hear me. Oh dear. I cannot hear you now, Ola, no. Shall I continue? Oh, I can hear you now. People on Zoom can hear me, but perhaps there's something wrong with the speaker in the auditorium. Okay, so I'll just continue because I think everyone can hear me, although I can't hear Ola and the group in the auditorium. But what I was sort of going to go on to say was that, I mean, this is interesting. You know, what is compassion? It's a very interesting question. It's many things. It's perhaps seeing suffering, taking action from a place of loving kindness. It's a caring motivation. We draw on skills like empathy and understanding, mindfulness and awareness. It might be a physical kind of a feeling or sensation as well. And by the end of today, we might even stop and think about, you know, perhaps what word does describe this notion of compassion better for you. So I'll just go back to the presentation. So, you know, it is interesting. What is compassion? And you know, what's a boy to do to discover these things? Well, I went and asked my mum. So there she is, my mum, Dorothy Steindl. She was a GP for 40 years or so. She's retired now, of course. But for her, compassion is a feeling of understanding and of sorrow for the difficulties somebody else is experiencing and trying to do something about it. Not dissimilar to, Mats, what you were saying. And in fact, if I remember rightly, you're a GP too. So that was her view of it. But let's now explore Paul Gilbert's model. Paul Gilbert is professor in clinical psychology. He's at the University of Derby, but also the Compassionate Mind Foundation, which he established in the UK. And he would define compassion. Compassion is the sensitivity to suffering in oneself and others with a motivation and commitment to try to alleviate and prevent it. So it really has these two parts, the sensitivity to suffering, the sort of the engagement with suffering, and then the second part is the motivation, the commitment and the action to actually alleviate and prevent it. And you'll notice there that, you know, he incorporates compassion as a sensitivity to suffering in self and others. And so we'll come back to this a little bit later as well. But there he is again with that. That's when I first met Paul several years ago down in Byron Bay in, I think it was in Byron Bay in Australia. But more simply put, you know, may I be helpful rather than harmful towards myself and others. And I find this to be a really useful, you know, kind of starting point. May I be helpful rather than harmful towards myself and others. It really takes in that caring motivation and that desire to alleviate suffering. So sensitivity and commitment might sound something like this. Boy, that other person is really suffering right now. Their situation is difficult and painful. That's sensitivity to suffering. I really want to take steps to do something that might make things a little easier for them. That's motivation. And what's something I could do right now that would be helpful for them and most supportive of their well-being? So that's commitment to taking helpful action. And in some ways, you know, this really is what we're trying to do in motivational interviewing. I feel that actually compassion is a part of MI, but in some ways, MI itself is compassionate action. It's the sensitivity to the suffering, it's a motivation to do something to help alleviate that suffering. And we do that through listening well and through advanced listening. Also, as a part of compassion from the point of view of the Gilbert model are these key concepts: wisdom, strength, and courage. And so compassion is wisely assessing a situation in which another person or ourselves may be suffering, and then arriving at a course of action to help alleviate that suffering. That's the wisdom piece. And then we do that with the strength and groundedness that kind of readies us or steadies us in the presence of suffering so that we can cope with the feelings that may arise. It's not easy to be in the presence of suffering. And we kind of know that a calm mind thinks differently. If we're able to stay strong and grounded and stable and calm, then we can think differently. Then we can think in the most helpful ways. And compassion is also courageously approaching that suffering. Even when we feel fear or hesitation or an urge to avoid, it takes a lot of courage to be compassionate. And in some ways, compassion is kind of kindness and love and something that's very warm and so on. And sometimes compassion is actually one of the most courageous things that we can do to move towards suffering and to take those actions that we wisely know might help to alleviate it or prevent it. It takes a lot of courage to step towards suffering. So I just wanted to do a little brief compassion exercise now. This is just a briefer one to get us kind of going, and we'll do a longer exercise towards the end. But if everyone wouldn't mind just putting down your pens and paper and whatever, and if you could just, for a little brief few moments, just gently close your eyes. And see if you can think of someone you're currently working with, perhaps someone with whom the work has been challenging. There's been disappointments or things haven't quite gone to plan. Just try to develop a picture of that person in your mind. Feel the presence of that person in your working life, perhaps even in this moment. And now consider and say to yourself, just quietly in your own mind, some of the following. This person is just like me. Just like me, they have a history. They were a child once too. And just like me, this person has had ups and downs in their life. Just like me, this person has had goals and dreams. Just like me, they have strengths and qualities. They have fears and vulnerabilities. And just like me, they've had successes and they've made mistakes. All right, now if you wouldn't mind, just once again opening your eyes. My question to you was, how was that for you? What was that like to go through that little sequence there, beginning with the first half, imagining that person with whom the work has been challenging, and then the second half, considering and saying those things to yourself. I was going to throw it to the group, but given the microphone problems, we may not get a chance to get much back. But even typing in the chat, what was that like to go through that little practice?
I'm just testing the microphone.
I can actually hear you now, Ola.
Great.
So what was that like, just to go through that little brief compassion practice? Maria has said in the chat, it gives me a broader sight of others, more perspective taking. Okay, that's beautiful. Yeah, it creates a sense of the whole person in a way, and a recognition that they're not just the problem that we face right now, but actually they're a whole person and they have a history, and it creates a different kind of perspective, which probably itself is part of empathy. That's great. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Exactly. Thank you, Maria.
About the person. I say softer, like a feeling.
Softer feeling. It kind of softens some of that feeling that we might have for the person. I mean, if you think about it, when we're dealing with a person and the work has been challenging, sometimes our own threat system is activated, isn't it? We get into a sort of an anxious or frustrated kind of mode, whereas compassion helps to soften some of that and to create a sense of calm. Mats has said, it's a reminder of the need to just slow down for a minute, to consider things are not immediately in front of my face. Yeah, there's a whole context, historically, and also just life context around this person that I'm working with right now. So there's kind of creating a sense of the whole person. There's sort of a shift in perspective taking. There's a softening of the feeling towards that person. And perhaps the only other thing too that sometimes comes up is that sense of common humanity, that we recognize that actually it's sort of tricky for all of us. We all are doing the best we can with what we've got, and trying to connect with another person from that point of view of the common humanity. So compassionate mind training. Basically, this is really a process of trying to develop our brains and our bodies to help us to attend and think and feel and behave in compassionate ways. And it's interesting because it does take practice. We want to start to do things now, especially given compassion has been brought into the MI spirit. We want to do things to develop a mind and a body that can deliver on compassion. We want to build a compassion motivation, intention. We want to build the skills and capacities to do that with the purpose of alleviating and preventing suffering in others. And we do it through a whole range of psychoeducation, mind awareness, mindfulness, body work, visualizations, imagery, rehearsal and embodiment. We really try to develop a mind and body that can deliver on compassion. And the underpinnings of all of that really are that we are all born after thousands of years of human evolution, adaptation, specifically the evolution of the human brain, and that it's really very tricky. We have tricky brains, and so do all of our clients or patients, the people that we're working with. have these human brains as well. That, and if you think about it, evolution is very concerned with survival and reproduction. It's not really concerned with making us happy. And so we have these brains that are great for helping us to survive, but they can cause us a lot of suffering. And so we're born with a collection of genes, strengths and weaknesses. Maybe they're passed down through our parents and whatever. And actually, none of that is through any choice of our own. We don't get to choose our brains. We don't get to choose our genes. And then we're born into a social context that we also don't get to choose. We have life experiences, and they just simply start to happen, and they shape us. And it really is a lottery, you know, where we're born, the families that we're born into. For example, here in Australia, if I was born literally 500 kilometres west of here, my life expectancy would have been much shorter because of the various social, economic and other factors that vary and change across Australia. And none of that we get to choose. And so we end up with this compassionate idea that it's not our fault. So much of our suffering, so much of what happens to us, even many of the choices that we make in life, it's not our fault.
Is that why I broke up with Skylar? I didn't know you had it. I did. You want to talk about it? No. You will? I don't know what. You see this? Holy shit. Not your fault. Look at me, son. It's not your fault. I know. It's not your fault. I know. No, you don't. It's not your fault. I know. It's not your fault. Right? It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Don't fuck. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean. Not you. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Oh my God. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
You can see there the range of emotions that Will went through in that little sequence. The first of all, the kind of flippancy of, yeah, I know it's not my fault. And then the apprehension and defensiveness of, yeah, I know. And then the anger, you know, don't do this to me, Sean. And then, of course, the grief, the recognition of the sadness and loss of what had happened in his life and how that had kind of shaped him. And so compassion really comes or begins with this recognition that it's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's to do with these tricky brains, these genes that we didn't get to choose, and the experiences that go on to shape us. It's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. And this can be, it's a tricky concept really for us too, to understand. The idea, I think, with compassion, especially in MI, is we're really wanting to steer away from blame and shame. You know, the last thing we want to do in MI is shaming the person that we're working with. So we want to move away from blame and shame, but without people feeling resigned or disempowered or having a kind of a careless disregard for what they're going through. We're wanting to try to really connect with this idea that the brain is an organ, basically, that creates outputs, desires, motives, emotions. What arises in me is not my fault, and my genes and the social conditioning produce the content of my mind. But I need to learn how to deal with this stuff psychologically, hygienically, if you like. It's my responsibility to learn about my mind and with a compassionate intention, be sensitive to suffering and to take steps to prevent or alleviate that. So I sort of take responsibility for what my mind does without blaming, criticizing, or shaming myself for what my mind does. And so just having a little bit of a think about that now, turning to the person next to you and discuss this idea, this compassionate idea. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And just see if you can think about that in particular in terms of motivational interviewing. How does this also make sense for motivational interviewing and for the spirit, for the MI spirit, the way that we might approach our clients? So just a couple of minutes there to think about this compassionate idea. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Off you go. And of course, those of you at home can type into the chat.
Jag landar i sådana substanser där vi kan inte för vad vi känner och vi tänker på någonstans så vad vi gör så stämmer vi lite mer över. Ja, men precis så det blir ja, vad man gör med. Det är väldigt icke-dömande. Ja, det är ni som är med extra. Samtidigt ska man utmana, tycker jag. Alltså, jag tänker att det här utmanings- eller utvecklingstid och så. Vet ni vad?
Just a minute or so to go.
Ja, men där vill du komma till det här med
All right. Well, we might just wrap that one up there as well. We've had some interesting stuff in the chat. Matt said, it's a very strong and useful sentence indeed. As for the spirit of MI, it makes me think of both compassion, but also, and perhaps even more, acceptance, both absolute worth, but also autonomy support. And Maria kind of agreed. From that perspective, I'd say it's strengthening autonomy. It's my responsibility to take care of myself and my actions. And if I feel you're supporting me in that, I think it's MI. So yeah, that's actually really interesting to see the way that they're not kind of literally separate, are they? They're sort of working very much together there. And Matt's also said, it's a reminder to the patient, you are accepted for who you are, and you are the one who can do something about it. And in the spirit of MI, I want to be helpful to you in making it happen. And then Ola says, in MI, we try to help someone take action towards change, and along with action towards change, there comes responsibility to do so. Yes, it's interesting. Often I quote, Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, where he says to Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility, I guess. And that MI's, that's just a joke really, but MI is a bit like that. We do respect choices and we work with that, and there is a responsibility kind of that comes along with that as well. Okay, we might keep moving along and just mention now some of the finer points, some of the attributes and competencies of compassion. If you're interested in some of a deeper dive into the compassionate mind, I do have a couple of books at the end that you might like to take a look at, because there's a lot to all of this, and so we don't quite have the time to dive in. But this is the compassionate mind. Compassion has these attributes: sympathy, distress tolerance, empathy, non-judgment, care for well-being, and sensitivity. Those are kind of the attributes of the compassionate mind. And then these are the skills that we use to get there, using imagery, reasoning, behavior, sensory kind of skills, feeling and attention. And all of that is wrapped up with wisdom, strength, and commitment. And so really, in compassion, we become sensitive to the suffering of others and ourselves, with a non-judgmental acceptance and empathic understanding, feeling sympathetically moved by this suffering and motivated by a care for well-being, to help or to offer help, while also developing our ability to tolerate our own feelings of distress if or when they arise. And this is really interesting. We're sensitive and non-judgmental. We have empathy, so we resonate with what the other person's feeling. But we also have sympathy, so we have a feeling of our own. We're kind of moved by what they're going through. And so we need to have distress tolerance. We need to be able to tolerate those feelings of distress that might arise when we resonate with their feelings and feel moved by all that with feelings of our own. It's interesting from the compassionate mind point of view, because they would argue that empathy and sympathy are important attributes of the compassionate person. We empathize by understanding the other person and their feeling and what they're going through. And we sympathize, we feel moved or touched by that suffering, and that helps us to feel more motivated to take action. Empathy is a skill. It's interesting with empathy because in some ways, empathizing is just being able to affectively or cognitively understand the other person and their feelings and meanings and motivations and so on. What we do with that can vary. Sometimes people might use their empathic skills, but for their own advantage. A salesman might use empathy to understand a person and work out how to make the sale. But with sympathy, when we feel sympathetic towards the person, we're much more likely to feel moved to taking action to be helpful for them. So this might be something, we probably don't have time now actually, but that might be something to discuss as a group over morning tea or whatever. Just what you think of this idea, empathy and sympathy, kind of combining to make a more compassionate person. And we use these skills. We try to relate with thoughts mindfully, cultivate compassionate ways of thinking, reasoning and understanding. We develop compassionate attention, awareness and sensitivity. We use sensory focusing exercises to help slow and calm the mind and body. We use imagery to develop and apply compassion in our lives and work with difficult emotions. We cultivate compassionate feelings of warmth, kindness, courage, affiliation and safeness. And we construct a repertoire of compassionate behaviours, things we can do to take compassionate action. And of course, compassion flows in three ways. Compassion might flow from ourselves to others, but it also might flow from others to ourselves. We might also practice being open to receiving compassion. And then, of course, compassion flows from self to self. And this is an important part as well. And this can be the difficult piece, but being able to practice self-compassion. In MI, of course, we're particularly interested in ourselves offering compassion to others. But these other two are important, I think, especially in terms of managing compassion fatigue. So any sort of thoughts and comments there, because we're going to now go on to talk about a little practice before we finish up at 15:15. So any thoughts, comments, questions, things you don't agree with, things you do agree with? What's happening in your minds at the moment in terms of this idea of compassionate mind? All right, that's all good. So let's have a bit of a think. So keeping all of that in mind, compassion is now part of the MI spirit. We've got this deeper sense of compassion now in terms of a sensitivity to suffering in self and others with a motivation and commitment to try to alleviate that suffering. That's kind of the definition we're working with. There's various attributes there, not least sympathy, empathy, distress tolerance, trying to keep it all going. And what we want to try to do is we want to find little practices using some of those skills to develop the compassionate self. So as we move into a session with a client, we're able to really embody this compassionate self. And there's, we always remember the wisdom of compassion. We have these genes that we didn't choose. We have tricky brains. We're shaped by our experiences. It's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. And this is compassionate wisdom. And so from there, we cultivate compassion to work with others. And there's three key things that I thought we might incorporate into a little practice. Firstly, soothing rhythm breathing. We want to slow down our bodies, slow down our minds, work with the breath. Doesn't make emotions go away, but like someone said, we can soften them and make room for that kind of mindful awareness and more compassionate ways of thinking. And so often, this can be an early strategy. We can practice this anytime, just 30 seconds at a time, just trying to practice soothing rhythm breathing. As you know, it's all about activating the parasympathetic nervous system and down-regulating the body and the mind. Secondly, we might use imagery. For example, safe place imagery. Imagery can be a powerful tool to get that soothing system and that compassionate motivation activated. We might imagine ourselves in a setting that creates a feeling of safeness, calmness, peacefulness, belonging. We might bring attention to various sensory details of this place. And we might even add a sort of an affiliative component, a piece of the image whereby we feel like we really belong and we feel like we have a connection with this particular place. And then we might start to cultivate this idea of our ideal compassionate self. Some of the characteristics and competencies of compassion, we imagine ourselves filling with warmth and wisdom and strength and courage and a commitment to be helpful. And we use these body-based practices and imagery and maybe even enactment or embodiment to develop these characteristics. We gradually start to embody this most compassionate part of ourselves and bring compassion into our work, but also just into our daily lives. And so what I was going to do now is just a little practice, an eyes closed practice for about 10 minutes or so. And afterwards, we can see what you think and just reflect a little bit on that before finishing up. So what I was going to actually ask everyone to do is, actually just to kind of create an upright but relaxed body posture where your feet are perhaps shoulder width apart on the floor, just rolling the shoulders back a little bit, opening the chest, sitting with your head up a little bit, chin up, facing towards the front or towards the horizon. And if you wouldn't mind just gently closing your eyes. And just take a few deep breaths to settle into the chair, settle into this moment. Perhaps just in your own mind, breathing in for a count of 3 and out for a count of 3. If you wish, you might even like to put a hand or both hands over your heart for a moment or for the whole exercise, just to remind yourself that you're giving yourself this loving kindness, this loving attention. Perhaps slowing the breath a little bit more, breathing in for 4 and out for 4 now. And bring your attention to your face and your facial expression. See if you can create a kind of a friendly face, relaxing the brow, unclenching the jaw. Maybe even just a faint smile. And now slowing the breath a little bit more, breathing in for a count of 5 and out for a count of 5. Saying to yourself, just silently in your own mind, and with a friendly voice, body slowing down, mind slowing down. And so as you just maintain that upright but relaxed posture friendly facial expression, friendly inner voice tones, and the soothing rhythm breathing. What I was going to ask you to do is just to imagine yourself in a place where you feel safe and comfortable and peaceful. It might be just your favourite room at home, or it might be your own backyard or somewhere near to home. Or it might be a peaceful beach somewhere, or a forest, mountains, or perhaps an imaginary place. Anywhere you feel peaceful, comfortable, and safe. Just explore this safe place for a few moments, kind of savouring the comfort of this place. I'm shortly going to ask you to imagine what it would be like to have certain qualities. And as I describe these qualities, try to imagine what it would be like to have them, what you would feel, think, and experience if you were this deeply compassionate person who'd already succeeded in developing these qualities. If you struggle to imagine this, just bring to mind a compassionate friend or colleague or someone else who has these qualities, and imagine how might it feel to be like that person. So first, just imagine that your body feels calm, peaceful, filled with warmth. Imagine that along with this warmth, you feel filled with a kind, committed motivation to help those who are suffering, to help others, to help yourself. Imagine that this kind wish to help fills you and builds within you, filling you up with a sense of purpose. Feel this deep wish to help. And imagine that along with this committed motivation to help, you're also filled with wisdom. You're able to think flexibly, see things from different perspectives. You're aware that difficult situations and emotions come and go. And rather than being captured by these experiences, you can draw on your wisdom with ideas of how to work with them. You know that difficult experiences are just a part of life. You're able to keep from judging them or yourself or others. And you can understand where these feelings and experiences come from. You can understand that we really have these tricky brains, and they can cause all sorts of desires or wishes or urges or cravings that we'd rather not have, and none of that is our fault. And so you have this wisdom of how to be helpful. Imagine being filled with this wisdom. And imagine that with this kind, committed motivation and wisdom, there arises a deeply felt sense of confidence, filling you with courage. You have this willingness to engage with difficult feelings and situations, knowing that whatever arises, you can work with this too. Feel this strength and courage building within you. So we're just imagining being filled with these qualities, a kind, committed motivation to be helpful, a deep wisdom about the human experience, and confidence and strength and courage to be helpful. Notice what it feels like as these qualities build within you. Imagine how you would experience the world as this deeply compassionate being. What sort of feelings would you feel? What sort of thoughts would you think? And what would you feel motivated to do? How would this motivate you in your work and in your practice? Now, let's put this version of you, your compassionate self, into action. When you feel ready, I'd just like you to open your eyes, maintaining that soothing rhythm to the breath, connecting with wisdom, strength and courage and caring commitment. And just look around the room as your ideal compassionate self. Just kind of notice what it's like to sit there in this compassionate self. Notice your facial expression, notice your breathing, your body posture. And whether you're at the auditorium or whether you're at home, if you like, perhaps if you wouldn't mind just standing up, just taking to your feet as you feel comfortable. And just start moving around the room as this version of you. I know it feels a bit funny, but just moving about the room now, embodying your ideal compassionate self. Just walk around the room. Notice, what does your body do? What's your facial expression like? How do you notice yourself just briefly interact with people as you pass by? Where does the spotlight of your attention go as you wander around, noticing people, even non-verbally, not speaking necessarily, but just noticing how you interact with others? Noticing the body, noticing the face, noticing the breath. And just noticing the way that your attention opens up towards others. And now just gradually, no need to rush, just making your way back to your chair. Gradually returning to your seat, still now sitting again as your compassionate self, upright but relaxed. And when you sit down, just gently closing your eyes once again. And spending a few moments just tuning in to your soothing rhythm breathing. In for 5, out for 5. Slowing the mind, slowing the body. And now, just when you're ready, once again, just opening your eyes, returning to the room. Stretch if you like, or move a little bit in the chair. And we can see if we can go on and carry these qualities of kindness and wisdom and courage and commitment with us through the rest of the day. And just turning to the person next to you now, and for a couple of minutes, just before finishing up, if you wouldn't mind, just having a little reflection on how that was for you. What was that like to go through that little practice? Good bits or not so good bits or whatever, but yeah, just having a little brief chat about how that was for you. And those of you in your offices or at home on Zoom, by all means, type some reflections into the chat. Just for a couple of minutes, guys, off you go.
Även om det upptäcks att den här osten var inte här. Sen tycker jag hon har ett läge som är Jag blev väldigt inställd. Sökte kontakt med andra.
All right. Well, I might kind of bring you back together there. I'm hoping that can go on to sort of stimulate further thought or discussion, you know, into morning tea and that sort of thing. But I was, wondering if anyone had any thoughts or reflections there. How was that for you, just to do that exercise? Some comments in the chat have said it was powerful, fantastic. A good reminder feeling lighter and brighter. Ah, yes, the third flow, self-compassion. It's interesting because the compassion itself has each of those three flows. But, oh, something we're not used to from Ola, relaxing both body and mind. We noticed a lot of thoughts popping up and how the mind wanders off to follow the thoughts. Needs practice. Yes, that's definitely why we call it a practice, isn't it? Because it's always, in a way, about practice. It's powerful and good, and sometimes harder than other times. And yet, this is really what we're wanting to start to do, I think. You know, that when you have your first client in the day or patient, you can probably be pretty compassionate with that person. You know, like when I go to work and I've had my skinny, flat white cup of coffee, I can be really compassionate to the first person I see, and then the second person, and then the third person, and then there's the fourth person, and actually every next person kind of needs and deserves the same compassion that the last person got. And so we're wanting to find little ways to keep that compassion buoyant and to keep our compassionate self, you know, somewhere to the fore. Maria, yes, that you liked that the exercise had a purpose and what the things to think of. And that's where a compassion meditation, I think, can be different to a mindfulness meditation. It's very purposeful. We're thinking about things like the human brain, evolution, wisdom, strength, and commitment, and so on. And then eventually, we might learn about this, we might start to practice it, and then gradually we start to embody compassion. We begin to embody compassion in our daily lives. We strive to become the embodiment of this. We see compassion as a part of us as a part of compassion, and we can commit to noticing and alleviating suffering, both in other living beings, but also within ourselves. So let's not leave it to others. Let's not wait to be inspired. Let's not put it off another day. We can manifest our embodiment of compassion through our actions today, taking steps towards kind, wise, and courageous action in all aspects of our lives, but not least in our clinical work or our work with clients or patients or in our motivational interviewing. There are a few books there that you may wish to have a look at. Paul Gilbert's Compassionate Mind is, of course, the seminal work, which you might like to have a look at to really dive into. See, Russell Colts, Mary Welford, and Chris Irons, these are sort of more workbooks that teach you in very practical terms how to do it. And I just thought I'd give a little plug for a free ebook that I created recently. It's called Compassion in a T-shirt. The first 35 scripts, and really it's just a compilation of some of my scripts from my YouTube channel. And actually there's my YouTube channel, Compassionate T-shirt. So if anyone's interested in learning more, that's another option as well. But yeah, please stay in touch. If anyone would like to contact me at any time, my email address is there, but otherwise connect on some of the social media if you like. But yeah, that's basically what I was hoping to present for you today. So I hope that's been helpful, and I hope you go on to have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much, guys.